Imagine you're going to work on a very normal day. It's a day like any other, really. Except for the fact that suddenly, your boss starts rambling on and on about random, crazy and incoherent things. You probably excuse yourself to the bathroom or the water cooler just to get away, I guess. But what would you do if you were the first officer of an airliner cruising at 39,000 feet? Today, we're going to take a look at a very strange case that happened about a decade ago in the United States. This is the story of JetBlue Flight 191. Welcome to airspace. On March 27, 2012, JetBlue Flight 191 departed New York's JFK Airport for its roughly 5-hour flight to Las Vegas. For the passengers, this flight must have initially looked and felt like every other flight. For the crew, however, something was slightly off. The captain, a man named Clayton Osborne, had missed the crew briefing and arrived late at the aircraft, looking somewhat disheveled. Sparing no second thought to the matter, the crew was glad that the captain had finally arrived and the flight was able to commence. But already during the climb phase of the flight, the first officer was confronted with bizarre statements made by the captain. As they were climbing, he mentioned something about being evaluated by someone. To the first officer, this made no sense whatsoever. Soon after, the captain started to talk about his church and needing to focus. He asked the first officer to take the controls as well as the radios so he could concentrate. The first officer followed the commands he was given, but he grew more and more concerned. It must have been a very odd scene to witness. While the plane was in cruise, the captain's ramblings about religion grew more fervent, but his statements did not make sense at all. When the first officer inquired what he meant, the captain replied, "Things just don't matter anymore," which really set off the co-pilot's alarm bells. His superior then continued to shout at air traffic control over the radio, and then, one by one, started turning off his cockpit displays. When the first officer tried to answer radio calls, he was sternly admonished by the captain. I can only imagine how uneasy the first officer must have felt in such an awkward and surreal situation. Do you like the video so far? If you do, make sure you leave a like, subscribe and turn on the bell icon. Up in the air, things were about to get much worse. When the captain suggested that he and the first officer needed to take a leap of faith, that they were not going to Vegas and that it was a city of sin anyway, the first officer had enough. Remembering that they had an off-duty flight crew on board with them, he strongly suggested to the captain that they should invite the off-duty captain to the flight deck, probably hoping that the latter would either help bring his superior to reason or help to remove the man from the flight deck. Right away, this had the opposite effect, as the captain now started to give what the first officer later described as a sermon. But when he had finally finished, the captain abruptly got up and left the flight deck, without notifying the flight attendants in the forward galley near the cockpit, as would have been procedure. Alarmed by his behavior, they asked Captain Osborne if something was wrong, but in response, he only aggressively grabbed the hands of one of them. He banged on the lavatory door, which was at the time occupied by a woman, stating that he had to go to the bathroom. When the captain eventually got the confused woman out of the washroom, he went in himself. Now, the first officer spotted a good opportunity and tasked the flight attendant to bring the off-duty captain to the flight deck. The replacement captain was ready immediately and got to the cockpit before the crazed original captain returned from the lavatory. After he had finished his business, Captain Osborne naturally tried to return to the flight deck, but access was denied by the first officer. Enraged by this, the captain ran to the back of the aircraft, but not without insulting a random passenger on the way. Then he sprinted back to the cockpit door and tried to enter his emergency access code, but to no avail. The first officer had locked the bulletproof door. Still, the captain tried to break it down while shouting about Jesus, September 11th, Israel and Iraq. Finally, the first officer had enough and gave the order over the public address system to restrain the frenzied captain. Luckily, the aircraft was on its way to an international security conference, so there were many law enforcement officers and security personnel on board who quickly subdued the captain. It however took a huge effort to keep the man under control, as he even briefly managed to break free from zip-tie handcuffs. All the while, he continued shouting nonsense such as, "Guys, push it to full throttle." In the meantime, the first officer had briefed the replacement captain on what had happened and asked him to assist in the upcoming emergency landing. Yes, the incapacitation of a flight crew member in a two-man cockpit usually warrants a declaration of an emergency. Also, by that time, it must have been abundantly clear that the captain had a serious medical condition that most probably required urgent care. In a calm and collected manner, the first officer and the replacement captain landed the A320 safely in Amarillo, Texas. From the time the captain had to be restrained until the plane came to a stop and policemen boarded the aircraft, passengers had to hold the captain down on the floor since he struggled to break free violently all the time. Luckily, only one crew member was slightly injured when a stray punch bruised her ribs. For the 150 passengers of this flight, it probably was of the more memorable sort. The captain was eventually given sedatives and offloaded into an ambulance by law enforcement officers. He was, of course, immediately suspended from work after having been with JetBlue for more than 12 years. Also, he was put on trial and charged with interfering with flight crew duties. Eventually, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was, however, to be immediately transferred to a mental health facility where he would receive further treatment and care. A few months later, Captain Osman was released under the conditions that he had to follow a medication and therapy regime and had to be monitored by a probation officer. Given this story and considering the medication he had to take, it is probably safe to say that he never flew again. What exactly the cause for his mental breakdown had been was never publicly disclosed. Possibilities suggested included the onset of a psychotic disorder, a neurological event that compromised his brain function, or intoxication due to medication. This was, however, not the end of the story. In March 2015, 3 years after the incident, the captain sued JetBlue for $14.9 million, claiming that the airline did not ensure he was fit to fly and subsequently endangered the lives of his crew and passengers. JetBlue settled the dispute out of court the following month already, never disclosing to the public how much they had paid. So, what do you think about this incident? Have you ever heard of it before this video? Let me know in the comments. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, and especially turn on the bell icon to be notified of new videos. YouTube has been a bit inconsistent with sending notifications to my subscribers recently. That said, thank you so much for watching, and see you all in the next one.